At exactly 36 seconds in, the quiet of the hearing room fractured. Donald Trump's palm slammed the table. The microphones rattled. The echo bounced off the marble like a warning shot. He jabbed a finger sharp accusatory toward Representative Jasmine Crockett and snarled, "She's low IQ. I dare her to take a test." The chamber recoiled, gasps. Camera shutters snapped open like automatic weapons. Reporters leaned forward. A few aides stiffened, unsure whether to intervene or sit in awe of the chaos blooming like wildfire. But Jasmine didn't flinch. She didn't roll her eyes. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't even look surprised. Instead, she calmly reached into her folder, smoothed deliberate, and withdrew a sealed envelope. No markings, no rush, just paper and silence. She placed it gently on the table, not like a document, like a verdict, like a countdown had just begun. Trump paused. His mouth hung slightly ajar, a flicker of confusion breaking through that practiced grin of confidence. Something in the way she laid that envelope down, so slow, so sure, made the air heavier, as if the oxygen itself recognized danger. What was inside that envelope? What could make the most arrogant man in America, a man who bragged about passing the hardest IQ tests, suddenly shift in his seat like he'd seen a ghost from his past? The hearing room had seen political theater before, but never like this. The place was too polished to feel real. The floors gleamed like glassy water, ready to crack under pressure. The flag stood behind the dais like tired soldiers, pressed, colorless, mute. The overhead lights didn't glow, they interrogated, cold and merciless, casting no shadow for secrets to hide in. The microphones blinked, red like sniper dots. Each light a reminder, speak wisely, or bleed. And in that perfect sterilized setting designed for spectacle but not for truth, Jasmine Crockett made her entrance like she'd come to baptize the room with reality. She didn't walk in. She arrived, no flash, no theatrics, no designer statement or gleaming pearls, just a razor-sharp, midnight blue suit, and eyes that could dissect a lie from across a state line. Her heels didn't click, they struck, each step echoing like the slow toll of a bell right before a verdict drops. Jim Jordan spotted her first, whispering to Eric Trump, teenage boy energy in a grown man's suit. They chuckled like the locker room bullies who knew the principal wouldn't call their names. Eric tilted his head, scanned Jasmine like she was a fashion statement his father would call to woke, and smirked. But seated at the witness table was the real thundercloud in the room, Donald J. Trump. Orange makeup, stiff shoulders, steepled fingers, that same predatory grin. He didn't look at Jasmine like a man greeting a colleague. He looked at her like a lion trying to psych out the one creature in the wild he knew he couldn't intimidate. But Jasmine, she didn't blink, she didn't acknowledge the gaze. She walked past like the lion was just a statue in a museum. She sat, smooth, controlled, unshakable. She opened her folder as though unsealing a scripture, and laid one envelope down. No label, no sound, just presence. In the atmosphere it changed. It shifted like someone had just cocked a loaded weapon and placed it on the table with a smile. CNN zoomed in. MSNBC adjusted gain levels. X, formerly Twitter, exploded. The phrase IQ test was already trending before the word test had even hit the airwaves. The chairman, Emlyn, cleared his throat. Today's hearing will explore academic transparency, credential inflation, and the impact of standardized testing and leadership qualification. He didn't look at Trump. He didn't need to. The entire room was already looking. Then, Jasmine did one thing. She tapped the envelope. Once, soft, measured, but the sound, it landed like a gavel. And Donald Trump's smile faltered barely. But Jasmine saw it, and when a man like Trump blinks first, you don't need to raise your voice. You let the silence tighten the noose. Trump, of course, couldn't leave it. He leaned forward into the mic, voice slick with arrogance. Frankly, some of these people, they're not qualified to be in this room. I mean, look at that one. The finger lifted again, not quite pointing, but aimed, like a weapon that fires with implication instead of bullets. Low IQ, AOC2? I wouldn't let either of them run a classroom, let alone Congress. A soft laugh crept from the right side Marjorie Taylor Greene's sharp nasal cackle. She covered her mouth like it wasn't meant to be heard, but her shaking shoulders betrayed her. Jim Jordan smirked. Eric Trump leaned back, arms folded, proud like a boy who thought his dad had just owned the libs. The room drank in the toxicity, and Jasmine, still unmoved, still centered, one fingertip still resting gently on the envelope like it contained the receipts of an empire's collapse. Inside, her thoughts were roaring. They want rage. They want me to raise my voice. They want the angry black woman clipped to loop on Fox for days. Let them wait. I'll give them something quieter, something that detonates without smoke. Trump pressed harder, chest puffed with bravado. You know, I've taken IQ tests. Very hard ones. They don't let just anyone take them, you know? You have to be a genius. He grinned wider, smug, stretching across his cheeks like it was elastic. I passed with flying colors. That's why I'm here. And they're struggling. And then, with the same inflated pride he used when declaring bankruptcies, pardons, or shady real estate wins, he said it. Let's settle this with an IQ test. 8 words. Just 8. But but that was all Jasmine needed. 8 words. That's all it took to rupture the atmosphere. Let's settle this with an IQ test. Those 8 syllables didn't just echo, they ricocheted. They slammed into the wood-paneled walls of the congressional chamber like a verbal Molotov. They tore through the air like shrapnel, and within 90 seconds they'd exploded across the internet. TikTok montages, Twitter or X hashtags, CNN alerts, podcast reaction clips. The impact was instant and irreversible. The room cracked, gasps stirred like wind rustling through dry leaves in a scorched field. Reporters froze mid-keystroke. iPhones rose like shields. Recording. A shiver passed through the press box, not from cold but from recognition, because this wasn't policy anymore. This was war. And Jasmine Crockett. She didn't even blink. No eye roll, no breathless rebuttal, no flash of rage. She moved with precision like a surgeon about to make the first cut. She shifted in her seat, calm and regal, lifted the envelope with 2 fingers, and slid it forward just 1 inch closer to the microphone. No flourish, no drama, but it landed like thunder. Trump didn't see it. He was too busy soaking in the smug faces around him, his son Eric leaning back, already watching the moment trend on his phone. Jim Jordan whispering to Marjorie like a schoolyard instigator feeding a bully's fire. But Jasmine knew something they didn't. She knew chaos is loud but truth is quieter, more patient, more deadly, especially when it's wrapped in sealed white paper, 60 years old, with a pulse. Behind that envelope was a reckoning, a secret, a proof. Something 31 million Americans weren't ready for but would never forget, because Donald Trump had just challenged the wrong woman to a test. He thought she'd swallowed the insult. He thought she'd been silenced. He didn't realize she was loading her response like a sniper loads a final round. As the room settled into uneasy stillness, Trump leaned back like a boxer who'd landed a clean punch in round 1 already counting. The points. Eric smirked, thumbs dancing across his phone. Marjorie scribbled bold all caps fury across her yellow notepad. Jim Jordan grinned, the gleam of confidence leaking from every tooth. They thought Jasmine Crockett had taken the blow and gone quiet, but then she leaned forward gracefully, like a candle leaning into its own flame, and said, "Mr. Chairman, I'd like to move my questioning to the end of the session." Her voice didn't waver, didn't rise, didn't invite drama. It was the kind of calm that shifts pressure in a room, the kind that makes birds fall silent and winds reverse course. The clerk blinked, the chairman paused, brows furrowed, and then, after a beat too long, he nodded. Granted, no one questioned it, no one objected, but a shift had occurred, subtle and invisible, like air going still before lightning breaks the sky. Meanwhile, deep in the back corridor, 2 of Jasmine's staffers moved like shadows, fast, but silent. One held a black leather folio, the other, a flat brown envelope, thick with age, sealed in wax, stamped in fading typewriter ink, confidential -1964 admissions. They handed it to a runner, who slid it into Jasmine's folder behind her seat. She didn't turn, didn't check. She felt it the way a storm feels when it settles into your bones. Felt it in her spine, not her hands. Because truth is weight. And when it's that old, it vibrates. She rested her fingers on it gently, not to reveal it, but to hold it back like one hand pressed on the lid of a boiling pot across the table. Trump was still talking. About schools, about test scores, about American values. But the volume was useless now. His words were echoes bouncing off a wall of something coming. And Jasmine wasn't listening to him. She was listening to a memory. Her father, an inner-city schoolteacher, who never earned more than $42,000 a year once, said to her over a dinner of boxed macaroni, "The most dangerous thing you can ever bring into a room is the truth dressed like a whisper." She was 9. She didn't understand it then. Now she lived by it. She smiled, not the kind that bears teeth, but the kind that bears resolve. The kind of smile that only comes when the final move is already in motion. The checkmate grin. The chairman called recess. Chairs scraped back. Press typed furiously. Security repositioned. Trump stretched, yawned like a man wasting his time on nobodies. Laughed a little too loudly. But for the first time since she entered, he didn't look at Jasmine, because somewhere inside him, deep beneath the bravado, something whispered that she wasn't done, not even close. She wasn't holding paper. She was holding proof, and proof doesn't shout, it detonates. But what was inside that envelope? That would be the question that haunted headlines, the mystery that would reroute careers, the story that would fracture narratives like stained glass dropped from the Capitol dome. The room didn't know it yet, but something had shifted permanently, not with screams, not with shouting, but with Jasmine Crockett's silence. And silence, when used well, is not an absence, it's a presence, louder than thunder. Confetti, that's what Trump called it, confetti, a carnival of ego. "Frankly, folks," he said, voice bouncing off the marble like a second-rate Broadway monologue, "this has been one of my best hearings. Nobody even tried to debate me. Laughter, cheap, hollow, too loud." His words hung in the air like bad perfume, polluting the air of a room that was once meant for justice. And he wore his arrogance like a crown tilted, tarnished, but gleaming just enough for cameras to catch. But Jasmine, Crockett? She wasn't watching him. She wasn't there to react. She was there to study, to observe the entire room like a surgeon evaluating where to make the first incision. She clocked it all: who laughed, who shifted in their chairs, who avoided her eyes. She wasn't chasing applause. She was letting the rope unravel, one smug chuckle at a time, waiting for the knot to tighten itself. And then came the signal from the side corridor. One of her aides, a quiet presence, surgical and deliberate, entered and passed a silent message. A glance, a nod, a flicker of the phone. Jasmine read the screen once, just once. No reaction, but everything inside her shifted. The last piece had arrived. The document was confirmed. The source was real. The match had been struck. Still, she didn't move. Let him keep smiling. Let them all keep laughing. Because the truth doesn't interrupt, it detonates. And traps work best when no one realizes. They've been standing in one the whole time. She wasn't waiting because she was afraid. She was waiting because when the real truth drops, it doesn't land like applause. It drops like an earthquake. And this hearing room was inches from the fault line. It didn't arrive with fanfare. No drumroll, no alarms, just a soft knock at the chamber's side door. A plain manila envelope entered the room, tucked under an aide's arm like a classified weapon. No one noticed, not at first. That was the beauty of it, timing. In a room obsessed with noise, silence carries the sharpest blade. The aide approached her chair. Jasmine didn't look, didn't turn, didn't flinch. But the moment the envelope was behind her, she knew. She reached back, not with haste, but precision. Her fingertips closed around it as though it were made of gunpowder, not paper. Her father's words returned. The most dangerous thing you can ever carry into a room is the truth dressed like a whisper. She slid the envelope under her notes like it was just another file. But it wasn't. It was the one, the final piece. The truth sewn shut for decades. Inside were 2 pages. 2, that's all. But they would be enough to fracture Donald Trump's mythology. The first was a dated letter from the New York Military Academy registrar, stating Trump's scheduled SAT examination in 1964 and his unexplained absence. The second, a sworn affidavit from a man long buried in the footnotes of history, Robert Steedman, a former classmate, a forgotten witness, a man whose body had aged hard, but whose memory had not aged a day. He'd testified under oath to Jasmine's legal team during a 2-hour deposition, and his words were clean, deliberate, and unforgettable. I was paid $1,000 by Fred Trump to take the SAT for his son Donald. Beneath that, his signature, old military ID, matching handwriting samples. A photo from a VA hospital bed. The truth wasn't just whispered now. It was certified, stamped, alive, and Jasmine Crockett could feel it beating beneath her hand like a second pulse. Across the room, Trump kept bragging. Bragging about ace tests, about being a very stable genius, about how some people just aren't built for excellence. His voice was like a TV left on in an empty motel room, loud, pointless, unaware. He had no idea the ground beneath him had begun to crack. And Jasmine, she didn't blink, didn't interrupt, because the trap wasn't just set. It was locked. It was silent. It was irreversible. Then the chairman called her name. The room shifted, reporters sat upright, phones lifted, security leaned forward, and Jasmine, she rose with judicial precision. No fire, no flash, just gravity. She approached the microphone like she'd approached 100 courtrooms before, not to speak louder than her opponent, but to undress him with evidence. Her voice was steady, measured, more knife than flame. Mr. Trump, she began, almost softly, in your remarks earlier, you referred to yourself as a very stable genius, and someone who has always tested exceptionally well. Is that correct? Trump grinned like a schoolboy who knew the teacher didn't have his homework. Absolutely. I've always tested extremely well, some of the best scores they've ever seen, not just IQ SATs too. That's how I got into Wharton. Tremendous marks. Everyone knows it. The chamber was dead quiet. Jasmine nodded, slowly. And you've claimed to graduate at the top of your class. Yes, that's right. Wharton loved me, ask anyone, but professors very impressed. The air grew denser. Jasmine's eyes never wavered. Then, Mr. Trump, she continued, her voice cutting the silence like glass, would you be willing today to release your scores, your transcripts, since you've made them part of the public record? Trump scoffed. Sure, I've got nothing to hide. Always said that. Happy to. They'll prove everything I've said. Passed with flying colors. But aides were shifting now, eyes darting. Marjorie stopped writing. Jim Jordan leaned forward, frowning. Trump didn't notice. He was watching the cameras. Jasmine didn't smile. She tapped the folder, just once, like a gavel. Thank you, Mr. Trump, because I have here. She didn't even need to finish the sentence. The moment had arrived, and the next line she'd speak would be the beginning of the end. Trump blinked. Just once. A minor twitched so fast you could almost miss it, but it was there. Not fear, not yet, but something had cracked. A flicker in the mask, a ripple beneath the surface arrogance, a fracture beneath the concrete of certainty. Jasmine Crockett didn't pounce. She didn't need to. She adjusted the angle of her voice, calm, precise, surgical. So you wouldn't mind, she continued, If this committee reviewed those materials to compare them with your statements here today, correct? Trump shrugged, trying to maintain the swagger in his tone. Go ahead. I've said what I've said. They'll only confirm it. The hook was in, barbed, embedded, and Jasmine Crockett had never even raised her voice. She turned with practiced grace to the chairman. Mr. Chairman, with your permission, I'd like to submit these items into the hearing record at the conclusion of today's testimony. A simple nod from the dais, quiet, heavy, the kind of nod that carries the weight of history. Trump leaned back again, smug blooming across his face like a bruise. See, told you, transparency, but he didn't see it. Not the way the rest of the room did. He hadn't noticed the shift, the subtle coil in Jasmine's posture. He didn't sense how tightly the room had wound itself around her. Next move, he thought she'd come here to strike. He was wrong. She'd come to carve. Thought she'd swing wild. She was letting him build the scaffold with his own rope. The silence in the hearing chamber was no longer quiet. It was electric, saturated, a pause between lightning and thunder. Then, Jasmine moved, not fast, not loud. With the steady deliberation of someone unwrapping a bomb, every camera in the room snapped to her. Every journalist leaned in. Jasmine opened the folder with the grace of a surgeon, exposing the heart of a lie. Her hands didn't shake. They hovered, moved, unfolded like choreography, like ritual. And when she pulled out the first document, it was as if the temperature in the room dropped 5 degrees. An aged letter, yellowed edges, crisp folds, typewritten ink beginning to fade with time. She held it just high enough for the cameras to capture it, then gently placed it flat before her microphone. Still, she said nothing. She let the room stretch. Let the tension grow taut like a wire before a snap. Then she spoke. This, Jasmine began, her voice even and composed, is an official communication from the New York Military Academy, dated May 10, 1964. Across the chamber, Trump's head tilted ever so slightly, not denial yet, but recognition, or maybe dread. Dressed in the same suit he wore for every scandal, arrogance, Jasmine continued. This letter confirms that Cadet Donald J. Trump did not appear for his scheduled SAT examination on May 2, 1964. No explanation was provided. Rescheduling was not requested. The words hit like iron dropped on glass. A gasp, sharp and audible, cut through the chamber. A chair creaked. Reporters sat up straighter. Jim Jordan blinked like a man who'd seen lightning without thunder. Eric Trump froze mid-text, the glow of his phone reflecting the panic starting to rise in his pupils. Marjorie Taylor Greene's Sharpie slipped in her grip, dragging a crooked line across her notes. Trump tried to laugh. Too loud, too fast. That's nonsense, he barked, waving a hand. Never happened. I've got perfect scores. Ask anyone. Everyone knows it. But Jasmine didn't respond. She didn't raise her voice. Instead, she tapped her tablet once. A soft click. The screen flickered. The speakers hissed, and a grainy video began to play. Every head turned toward the monitor like it was the sun during an eclipse. On the screen, an elderly man in a hospital bed, pale skin, paper-thin hands, but a clear gaze that could still pierce. His voice, when it came, was slow, but unwavering. My name is Robert Steedman, he began. In 1964, I was paid $1,000 by Fred Trump to take the SAT exam for his son, Donald. Silence, then stillness, then collapse. Steedman continued. I had higher scores. I was promised a favor for my trouble. I wore Donald's cadet uniform. I signed his name. I took the test. And I've carried that secret for 58 years. Trump erupted. Fake news. That man doesn't even exist. He slammed his palm on the desk. The microphones jumped. The chambers shuddered with the impact of unraveling power. This is a hoax. A lie. I never missed a test in my life. Witch hunt. But Jasmine, she didn't even blink. Jachi stepped back. From the mic.com, as thunder in the distance. The man you claim doesn't exist, she said smoothly, was verified by 2 federal investigators, a handwriting analyst, and a witness protection advisor. His testimony is signed, notarized, and now entered into the congressional record. Trump stood now, fists clenched, jaw tight, eyes darting. I want that stricken. You can't put that on record. Chairman Emlyn leaned forward slowly, voice cool, firm. You testified under oath, Mr. Trump. She just brought receipts. And then the audience, once frozen, now began to buzz like a swarm had been disturbed. The sound wasn't chaos, it was recognition. Across the chamber, a shift, a reckoning. A nation watching itself in the mirror. But Jasmine, she didn't celebrate, she didn't spike the ball. She simply sat down, the same way she'd stood up, composed, complete, unshaken. The trap had sprung, and she hadn't even raised her voice. Then came the crack, not from Jasmine, not from the chairman, from Eric Trump, voice. High, thin, raw with panic. Cut the feed. Cut the goddamn feed. He was on his feet, arm outstretched, waving toward a Capitol technician like a drowning man clawing for a rope. This is illegal. You can't air this. His words weren't commands, they were pleas. The red lights on the cameras didn't waver. CNN didn't cut. MSNBC turned up the audio. Jasmine didn't turn Her head? She didn't need to, because once the truth enters the bloodstream, there is no antidote. Across from her, Marjorie Taylor Greene leaped from her seat, finger trembling in the air. "Mr. Chairman," she shouted, "strike it from the record. Strike IT." But it was too late, because you can't strike a landslide. You can't unring a bell that's already shattered the tower. And Jasmine Crockett didn't need volume. She had the truth, and the truth had come dressed like a whisper, and roared like a revolution. "This is character assassination. This is unconstitutional." Trump's voice rose like a failing engine, loud but sputtering, desperate in its combustion. The echo ricocheted off the chamber walls, hollow and frantic, as if volume alone could erase the facts now blooming like ink across the nation's conscience. Chairman Emmelin didn't flinch. He simply leaned forward toward his microphone, slow, deliberate, the way a judge leans into a verdict written not in pen, but in stone. "Everything said under oath remains in the record," he said. "That includes sworn affidavits and verified testimony from federal investigators." The words didn't crash. They carved, final, unshakable. Trump's fist slammed down on the desk again, this time with a fury that looked more like fear. His knuckles blanched white. His breath came harder, the way a man breathes when he realizes the fire is real, and the doors are locked. "This is a setup. She's a liar. I demand a rebuttal. Witness, this is fake. But the sentence broke halfway, cracked under the weight of unraveling certainty. He was drowning not in scandal. He'd survived those, not in lies he'd told thousands. He was drowning in the truth. And for the first time, it wasn't hidden in whispers, it was on camera. CNN didn't blink, MSNBC didn't cut. Fox froze mid-commentary, and producers in network control rooms whispered to their teams, "Don't you dare." Cut away. Behind Jasmine, an aide moved again, precise, quiet, practiced. Like a surgeon, another document passed forward. No flair, no theatrics, just execution. Jim Jordan leaned into Marjorie Taylor Greene like a teenager caught cheating in class. "We need to stall," he muttered. "Call a procedural delay. Buy time." But time didn't belong to them anymore. Time had already switched sides, and Jasmine. She finally spoke. Her voice was calm. Calm? The kind of calm that only comes from someone who knows she lit the match and who has no intention of blowing it out. "Mr. Trump," she said evenly, "you offered to share your academic record. We simply confirmed what the record always was." Trump seethed. His chest rose beneath the suit like something was trying to escape it. A storm zipped into fabric and pride, but Jasmine wasn't finished. "You called me low IQ," she continued. "You called others unqualified, but I didn't need to shout. I brought the truth, and I let it speak for itself." That sentence spoken, softly cut louder than any scream. Greene slammed her notebook shut. Jordan's hands clenched on the table until the veins shone white. Eric sat back down, but only because his knees had finally given up pretending. Chairman Emmelin raised the gavel once. Sharp crack. The sound echoed like a gunshot. "This hearing will proceed as scheduled, and unless you have evidence to the contrary, Mr. Trump, I suggest you remain seated." Jasmine hadn't stood yet, because she wasn't done, not even close. What she had dropped so far was proof. What she was about to deliver was motive, and the room had gone deathly still. Not in reverence, not in fear. Something else, something more ancient and dangerous. Recognition, a stillness that knows the earth is about to move. Trump sat stiff now, his fingers drawing anxious, trembling circles on the wood before him, searching for an exit that didn't exist. Marjorie froze. Jordan's stare went hard, but hollow. Eric Trump didn't lift his head, not because of shame. He didn't know that feeling, but because there was nothing left to look at. Everyone in that room had heard 1,000 speeches, but this wasn't a speech. This was surgical fire. This was the slow collapse of a myth, and Jasmine Crockett sat in the center of it, unmoved, unrushed, unapologetic. She didn't fix her mic. She didn't touch her notes. She didn't adjust her jacket. She didn't breathe louder than necessary. Her stillness was her verdict. And then, without raising her voice, still composed, still ice, she spoke the words that detonated the chamber. "This is what you called low IQ. Truth, under oath." The words didn't land like a punch. They landed like a gavel through glass. They reminded every soul in the room, in the country, that they had watched him live. Belittle a black woman in Congress with the casual cruelty of a man who'd never been held accountable. But now she sat with the documents, the affidavits, the tape, and the receipts. She didn't want revenge. She wanted revelation. Chairman Emmelin blinked slowly. He cleared his throat and looked at the clock, not to check the time. To avoid her gaze, because even he didn't want to meet that kind of fire head-on. Jasmine turned the first envelope sideways, sliding it gently beneath her stack of notes. Not to hide it, to make room for what came next. This wasn't the ending. This was the prologue. She wasn't just here to prove that Trump lied. She was here to show who had paid the price for that lie, and her fingers moved again, calm, precise. To another file. This one wasn't yellowed with age. It was pristine, recent, sharp-cornered, filed by a soul who had nothing but hope, until it was stolen with a check, a handshake, and a fraud. Jasmine didn't speak right away. She let the silence deepen. She let the room listen to itself. And then, softly, as if naming someone lost in a war, Elliot Harmon. Silence, she repeated. It, more clearly. Elliot Harmon, a black student from Queens. Applied to the same university, the same year, in the same region. His SAT score, based on certified records, was 1420. That's higher than the average. Wharton admission score, at the time, and significantly higher than Mr. Trump's score, which we now know, he never earned. The room shifted. A murmur soft, sharp, spread like heat through the walls. Reporters looked at one another. Producers in New York and LA stood up from their chairs. And Donald Trump, he didn't move, because he knew. That name didn't make headlines. That boy didn't get a second chance. That letter didn't come because his seat had been taken by a fraud. And Jasmine Crockett, still silent, still composed, still still, wasn't finished yet. Something about the name so ordinary, so forgotten hit harder than any insult ever could. It didn't just pierce the moment. It rearranged it, because this wasn't political anymore. This was human. And Jasmine Crockett knew that names are the sharpest kind of truth. Not the famous ones. Not the ones shouted across headlines. The quiet ones. The erased ones. She lifted the second document with solemn grace, her fingers steady as stone. She held it to the camera, angled just right so the public could see the seal, the date, the handwriting that time almost buried. This is a letter, she said evenly. Dated June 11, 1964 from the Admissions Committee at the Wharton School of the University of Pennsylvania. She paused. Let the words settle. Let the date breathe. It is addressed to Elliot Harmon, and then she read, each word. Slow, measured, like dropping stones into still water and watching the ripples reach the edges of the room. Dear Mr. Harmon, we regret to inform you that your application has not been selected for admission. Due to the high volume of applicants, we have no room for alternative candidates this year. A simple rejection. Clean, polite, and cruel. But Jasmine wasn't done. Her eyes scanned the page until they reached the real story scribbled in ink near the bottom. A line not meant for Elliot's eyes. A note from the administrator who signed it. She read it aloud. Each syllable an indictment. Too many quotas filled. Too risky. The words didn't land like a bomb. They landed like a slap you feel in your chest. There were no gasps. No dramatic reactions, just the sound of breath being held. Chairman Emmeline shifted, visibly rattled. AOC leaned forward, her expression unreadable but locked in. Jim Jordan looked down, his jaw tight. And even Trump, usually bombastic, quiet. His eyes narrowed. But his mouth didn't open because what could he say? Jasmine didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She laid the letter flat before her, perfectly aligned, perfectly visible, as if restoring it to the seat that had once been denied. He was 17, she said, valedictorian of his class, the son of a bus driver and a school nurse, applied early, met every requirement, and yet, he was denied. Her voice didn't tremble, but it landed like grief. He never got a second chance, never got to sit at the table, because someone else with a powerful name, a checkbook, and no test score was already sitting in his seat. That truth didn't just hang in the room, it built a wall across it. Not partisan, not blue or red dot, just a wall made of quiet injustice, undeniable and cold. And on one side of that wall stood Jasmine, holding a name the world had buried under 6 decades of dust and silence. But that letter, that was only half the story, because what Elliot Harmon did next would haunt the room far more deeply than the rejection ever had. Jasmine didn't speak. She let the name speak instead, because Elliot Harmon was no longer just a statistic or a rejection code. He was a fracture line running beneath the entire foundation of this nation's promises, and everyone in that room felt it. She tapped her tablet twice. The screen behind her flickered. Then it bloomed with an image. A woman seated on a worn leather couch, hands clasped tight, eyes already wet. A Chiron appeared. Danielle Harmon, daughter of Elliot Harmon. Her voice trembled before the first sentence even escaped her lips. My father, she exhaled, carried that pain his whole life. She looked down, wiped her nose. He never talked about it directly, not to me. Not even to my mom. But every time someone said the words Ivy League, he'd just go quiet. Every time someone asked about his dreams, he'd say, it wasn't the right time. A tear slid down her cheek. This time she let it fall. My dad should have been in boardrooms, in classrooms, in government. But he ended up driving a city bus in Queens for 32 years. She took a breath sharp full of history, and he did it with grace, with pride, but never with peace. But Chambers sat still like a graveyard, still like a confession. Every eye was locked on the screen. Jasmine's eyes never left Danielle's. And then came the final blow. The video cut to black, but the audio remained. A soft crackle, an old voicemail, dated just months before Elliot passed. His voice filled the room, weathered, gentle, and breaking. I always thought I wasn't good enough, he said. Thought maybe I missed something. Maybe it was my essay. Maybe they didn't like my photo, I didn't know. They never even saw me. Danielle's voice returned, low now, almost broken. He died, without ever knowing the truth. Without ever knowing he was qualified, that he was more than enough. that his seat was stolen before he ever sat down. The screen faded. No music. No pundit narration. Just silence. The kind of silence that doesn't just linger, it settles, that doesn't just ache. It accuses, because there are names like Elliot Harmon all across American history, deleted, redirected, erased, so someone else could walk in the door like they earned it. Jasmine stood slowly. She didn't fix her blazer, didn't adjust her papers. She didn't need to. The record was clear. She scanned the room, and this time, no one dared look away. My father was a teacher, she said softly, and he once told me, lies are like shadows. They stretch farther the longer you let them go unchallenged. But if you shine the right light, even once, they vanish. She placed her hand gently atop the closed folder. That's what today is. A light for one man who lost his chance. And for every name they tried to bury beside him. Trump sat still, mouth tight, hands clenched. No comebacks. No grin. Because even he knew, there is no insult strong enough to silence a ghost that just stood in the room and spoke through his daughter, and Jasmine Crockett. She still wasn't finished. Because sometimes ghosts don't just whisper. Sometimes they demand justice. And it didn't matter where you were. A diner in Nebraska, a high school in Detroit, a kitchen in Houston, or a church in Harlem, screens everywhere lit up with the same image. JasmineCrockettStill.com. Unyielding, backed by the quiet power of truth. And then, the world started talking. Not the pundits, not the spinners. The people. First came Twitter, then TikTok, then Reddit, then the group chats, then the teachers, the grandmothers, the teenagers, the bus drivers. And the same sentence started to spread like a wave with no origin. No leader, only truth. She just exposed everything. Some wrote it with fire. Trump paid to steal a seat. Crockett brought the receipt. Elliot Harmon's name will be taught in schools one day because of her. Others posted. In mourning, my uncle was Elliot. My mother was denied too. We've all lost something we didn't even know was stolen. The story wasn't about headlines anymore. It was about legacy. It was about what gets lost when lies win. And Jasmine Crockett, with nothing but a folder, a daughter's tears, and a name the world forgot made America remember. My dad applied to Wharton in 1970. He thought he wasn't good enough. He died thinking that. The post had no filter, no hashtags, just grief raw, stripped down, undeniable. A line of heartbreak typed by a stranger on a couch somewhere in America. But it shattered millions across timelines, because that line didn't just echo Elliot Harmon's story. It echoed the stories of fathers, sons, daughters, and dreamers whose names were never spoken into power. The lie wasn't just Trump's anymore. It was the lie that had shaped lives, silently, for generations. This just broke something in me. That reply came seconds later. Another voice. Different account. Same ache. People who had been told they were too loud, too much, not good enough, not the right fit, now felt something fracture and something else form. She didn't raise her voice, but somehow, Jasmine Crockett had raised all of them. Even the world, beyond the chamber, felt it. Late-night comedians paused their monologues. Reuters scrapped punchlines. Even conservative forums, usually ironclad echo chambers, showed signs of something rare. Cracks. A thread on a right-wing board read, "This doesn't feel like politics anymore. This feels like history." And it was. Cable anchors struggled to keep up. CNN cut away from pundits, letting the footage roll uninterrupted. MSNBC played Jasmine's quote on a loop like scripture. This is what you called low IQ, truth under oath. Fox News tried to pivot, grasping for account, but even their most seasoned spin machines couldn't make the moment bend. The emotion in the room, the undeniable humanity of it, all made every attempt at distraction feel brittle, hollow, and frantic. Inside the hearing chamber, the energy had shifted. Gone was the arrogance, gone were the smirks, even the marble walls seemed to hum with a kind of historical gravity. Trump no longer fidgeted. He sat too still, like a statue aware it was about to crack. His jaw clenched tight. The tips of his ears burned red. Marjorie Taylor Greene had gone silent. Her notes, untouched in her lap like a relic from another era. Eric Trump stared at the floor, not out of shame, but with the blankness of a man who had run out of exits. And Jasmine Crockett didn't blink. She let the silence hold. She let it burn, because sometimes, the most powerful thing you can say is nothing at all. Chairman Mellon leaned slightly into his mic. His voice had changed to lower now, reverent, like a man who knew he wasn't just presiding over a hearing, but a turning point. "Congresswoman Crockett," he said softly, "do you have anything else you wish to present?" She didn't hesitate. Her hand moved like a pianist beginning a final movement. She reached slowly into her folder. The first file had peeled back a lie. The second had resurrected a man. But now, she lifted something heavier, a folder thicker than the others, stamped not in black, but in red. Classified U.S. Department of EDSATO12 signatures had been redacted. But the watermark was real. The seal, unmistakable. She placed the file flat on the table. Her fingertips rested lightly on its surface, like she wasn't holding paper, but a detonator. No one could read her eyes from the camera's angle. But the message was clear. This isn't about Trump anymore. This is about the people who let him lie, who built the lie with him, who helped him get away with it, and just when the nation thought she had already delivered the gut punch, Jasmine raised a second folder, one that trembled the oxygen itself. Still, she said nothing. She didn't need to. The air had already changed. Now, thick with anticipation, electric like the moment before thunder, Trump saw her hand, watched it like it was a countdown. His eyes darted cameras, committee, staffers, anywhere but her. The man who had once filled arenas with noise now sat in a chair that seemed far too small, far too fragile for the weight he suddenly carried, because Jasmine wasn't just holding truth, she was holding proof, and he knew this next part couldn't be spun, it couldn't be joked away, it couldn't be denied. She unclasped the folder. Inside, a printed academic transcript, clean, neatly formatted, stamped with the seal of the University of Pennsylvania, the same document Trump's campaign had circulated in 2016, the same one flashed on Fox, bragged about in interviews, waved like a golden ticket at rallies and debates. She slid it under the overhead display, then surgical. Still she spoke. This is the academic transcript Mr. Trump's campaign has referenced repeatedly since 2016. It claims to reflect his achievements at Wharton. She let that hang, then turned the page. We submitted this document to 2 independent credential analysts and to a curriculum archivist from the University of Pennsylvania. She tapped the screen once, zoomed in. First semester, a course titled Business Strategy, misspelled, with an A. That course did not exist in 1966. It doesn't exist today. Chairs shifted. Reporters sat straighter. Chairman Millen leaned forward. She continued. Second semester, a course titled Global Economics 4. According to Wharton's archives, no such course existed at any level. At that time, Wharton offered only Economics I and II. A gasp rippled through the gallery. Someone audibly whispered, "Oh my God," and Jasmine wasn't done. Finally, at the bottom of the document, next to the registrar's seal, the verifying official's name is spelled incorrectly. The actual registrar, Dr. Leonard Wexler, spells his name with 2 E's. This document uses 1. He has confirmed under oath. He did not sign this transcript. Trump's eyes went wide. Not fear calculation, desperate calculation, looking for a door, a detour, an escape. But there wasn't one. The walls were closing in, not with noise, but with facts. Jasmine stepped back. Her words were final. This document was used to justify qualifications for the presidency of the United States. It was shown to voters, cited in speeches handed to reporters. It is, without question, a forgery. Trump stood, suddenly, fists clenched. This is a hit job, a political stunt. His voice cracked. I want to respect now, but Jasmine didn't flinch. She folded the transcript to one slowly and returned it to the folder. Then she looked up, her gaze locking with the camera's. He didn't just lie about a test. He lied about a degree, about a school, about the kind of man he pretended to be. And the next sentence would haunt headlines, classrooms, and campaign trails for years to come. And what comes next will shake every vote he ever earned. The folder was closed, but the tension in that room clung to every molecule like static before lightning. No one moved. Not even Trump. He hadn't sat back down. But he hadn't moved forward either. He stood half-cocked, caught between denial and collapse. And Jasmine Crockett, she stood taller than ever, because the lie had been pierced. And truth, when it finally speaks, doesn't need to shout. That's what was left in the chamber, unsettled dread. Not just the kind that sits in the gut, but the kind that coils in the air, like a storm waiting for the final crack of thunder. Then Jasmine Crockett turned ever so slightly to her right and gave a single nod, small, precise, but devastating in its implication. A side door opened with the faint hiss of old hinges. From it emerged a tall, lean man in a gray suit. His movements were deliberate, almost surgical, each step exuding the quiet precision of a man who didn't arrive to argue, he arrived to confirm. He held a slim briefcase under one arm, like it wasn't just filled with papers, but with scalpel stools ready to dissect a myth live on national television. His name was Dr. Eli Breener, credential analyst, professor emeritus, archival consultant to 3 Ivy League registrars, and the kind of man whose resume didn't need an introduction because it had already been submitted to the congressional record 2 days prior. But today, his presence wasn't for the committee, it was for the cameras. Jasmine motioned to the seat beside her with the poise of a conductor about to cue the orchestra. Dr. Breener, she said calmly, can you please share with this committee what you discovered about the document Mr. Trump's campaign submitted as evidence of his Wharton degree? Breener placed the briefcase on the table with careful intent, snapped it open, and removed a single annotated page. He adjusted his glasses not nervously, but habitually, as a man who lived in facts, not fiction. Yes, he began, his voice smooth, academic, and unsettlingly cold. Upon reviewing the transcript in question, my team and I identified multiple anomalies consistent with document falsification. He let that word linger, falsification, like a surgeon pausing just before the first incision. Then he continued, the most significant, though not the only error, is the font used throughout the document. Jasmine waited just long enough for the room to brace. The typeface used on the transcript, specifically in the headers and registrar's block, is Garamond Premiere Pro, a font family released in 1989. He paused. 1989. A year that might have passed as meaningless until the weight of context sank in. That font, Briner clarified, did not exist in 1968. Not on typewriters, not in university print shops, not in any official documentation standard used at the time. The chamber didn't gasp. This time, there were no theatrical outbursts, because no one needed to be told what that meant. They knew. Trump shifted in his seat, his discomfort now impossible to mask. His jaw flexed, his eyes darted. Then, snapping like a frayed wire, he blurted, "So now fonts are political." Dr. Briner didn't flinch. He didn't even blink. "We also noted kerning inconsistencies and pixel-based artifacts within the university seal," he continued. "This suggests that the seal itself was lifted from a modern digital file, likely a PNG image, and layered onto a blank document. That process is not just atypical for official records of the 1960s, it is technologically impossible." Jasmine leaned forward, not to dramatize, but to deliver the next cut with precision. "Dr. Briner," she asked softly, "in your expert opinion, is this document authentic?" He didn't hesitate. "No, Congresswoman, it is a forgery." The word echoed like a verdict. Final, sharp, undeniable. Jasmine turned not toward Trump, but toward the cameras, where millions of Americans were now watching with breath held and phones shaking in their hands. "Sir," she said, voice even, unwavering, "tell me this is lying about your IQ, more dangerous than lying about a nuclear code." That question hit like a floorboard snapping beneath the weight of history, and no one spoke. Not a rustle, not a cough, not a chair creaked. Because there was no answer he could give that wouldn't indict him further. Trump, once the master of media spectacle, the king of the room, sat still, silent and visibly shrinking. His armor of bravado had cracked, and all that remained beneath was panic. The document was fake. The font didn't exist. The seal, lifted. The man who once ridiculed others for being unqualified, had never even qualified for the lie he sold. Outside the chamber, Twitter was ablaze. TikTok stitched the testimony before it was over. Headlines began forming before chairs even moved. Forgery confirmed. Wharton transcript fake. Expert says under oath. Briner bombshell. Trump degree built on lies. And the weight of Briner's testimony hadn't even settled when Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez leaned toward her microphone. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her voice was exact, surgical, like the final stitch in a political autopsy. "This isn't about intelligence," she said. "It's about deception as a tool of statecraft. About a man who forged the illusion of merit and used that illusion to seize the highest office in the land." No applause, no fanfare, just a new silence deeper than the last. It was the silence of realization, of reckoning. Then came Jamie Raskin, measured, legal. "Cold, Madam Chair," he began, voice cutting like cold metal. "I would like to formally recommend that this committee submit its findings to the Department of Justice for criminal reviews. Academic fraud, as a method of campaign deception and misrepresentation of federal qualifications under oath." He didn't look at Trump. He didn't have to. The word fraud had now entered the congressional record, not as a tweet, not as an insult, as a charge. Trump sat no longer upright, no longer dominant, but slouched, the way a structure leans just before it crumbles. His mouth opened, then closed. No words came. His fingers twitched, tugging at the edge of the desk like he was searching for an anchor that wasn't there. The man who once ruled with volume now sat lost in a silence of his own making, and all the cameras knew it. But Jasmine hadn't moved. She sat composed, centered, still. Her power didn't come from shouting. It came from presence. She had turned stillness into dominance, silence into spotlight, and the country could feel it, across living rooms and workplaces. Across red states and blue, millions weren't turning the channel. They were texting friends. "Turn this on now." Behind Jasmine, her aides moved with quiet discipline. Documents passed, exhibits labeled, dates logged. No chaos, no scramble, just the calm of consequence. In the press gallery, the typing was relentless. Blog posts surged. Podcasts clipped the moment. One trending headline simply read, "Collapse in motion," and Jasmine hadn't even opened the final file. Not yet. Because this wasn't just about proving who Trump wasn't. It was about exposing who he had always targeted. That insult, low IQ, wasn't a gaffe. It wasn't a bad joke. It was strategic. It was calculated. And it was deeply racial. Jasmine had known it the moment he spatted at her, because she'd seen the playbook. She'd lived it. But she had waited through lies, mockery, and disrespect until this moment. The nation was breathless. The room was bracing, because the next file wasn't just going to expose another lie. It was going to show the system behind the lie, and why men like Elliot Harmon were never meant to sit where Trump did. And Jasmine hadn't even touched that folder yet, but everyone in that chamber already knew it was coming. Jasmine Crockett didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The chamber was already hollowed out, carved quiet by revelation, stunned by the weight of what had just been proven. And yet, the stillness wasn't over. Because what she was about to do next wasn't fury. It wasn't theatrics. It was something far more devastating. It was pattern recognition. She picked up a small remote from the desk with the care of someone not pressing play but pulling a trigger. She didn't glance at Trump. She didn't look around the room. She simply pressed the button and let the record speak for itself. The monitors flickered, then came to life, spitting out a reel 7 years long. It began mid-sentence, a familiar snarl echoing from a rally stage. Donald Trump, grinning, sweat on his brow, fire in his lungs. Maxine Waters. She's a very low IQ individual. The crowd erupted. Laughter. Applause. Cheers. Cut. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, young, defiant, standing tall in a House chamber. Trump again, scoffing, low IQ. I don't think she even knows what she's talking about. More laughter. Louder now. Anchored in mockery, wrapped in applause. Cut. Ilhan Omar, Somali-born congresswoman, labeled a disaster. She's not smart. Low IQ. And again, laughter almost weaponized now. The crowd didn't just react, they performed. Then the screen showed Jasmine Crockett, and the tape rolled. Crockett's IQ. I mean, maybe she should stick to traffic court. A final burst of laughter, then nothing. Silence. The screen went black. The chamber remained still. No one moved. No one dared. Jasmine let it breathe. 1 beat, 2, 3. Then she stood. She didn't raise her voice. Instead, she lowered it, not into anger, but into conscience. It didn't soar. It sank like truth pressed deep into marrow. Every time he fears a woman of color who speaks truth, this is his reflex, she said, voice even unflinching. He doesn't debate. He belittles. He doesn't counter. He erases. She wasn't speaking to Trump now. She was speaking through him, through every screen, every feed, every microphone. She wasn't defending herself. She was unveiling him. Her eyes scanned the dais, then fixed on the cameras not as lenses, but as a nation. It's not just rhetoric, she said. It's ritual. Trump didn't move, didn't smirk, didn't interrupt. His hands, once animated with swagger, were now white-knuckled, twitching in silence, because he knew the blow hadn't come from anger. It hadn't arrived in the tone he expected. It had arrived in precision, in a weapon he had no defense against. Restraint. You said it was about intelligence, she continued, her voice surgical now. But intelligence doesn't scare you. Accountability does. Outside, the internet erupted. Tweets ignited like fireworks in a forest. Hashtags trended. Hashtag reflex of fear, hashtag low IQ pattern, hashtag ritual of ERASURE, hashtag Jasmine decoded. News anchors cut mid-segment. To return to the chamber, even late-night comedians, prepping jokes backstage, stood still watching, silently. In households from Jacksonville to Juneau, elderly viewers leaned forward, mouths slightly open, unsure why their eyes were suddenly wet. It wasn't just about fraud anymore. It was about something older, deeper. It was about language as a weapon and the people. It was always aimed at. Marjorie Taylor Greene fidgeted, crossing and uncrossing her legs. Matt Gaetz tapped his pen like a nervous metronome. But no one interrupted, not a single. Reclaiming my time. Because Jasmine hadn't made an accusation. She had made a revelation. On the far side of the room, AOC gave a slight, nearly invisible nod. Rashida Tlaib blinked hard, hands tight in her lap. What Jasmine had just done wasn't a tape. It was a decoding. She had taken an insult meant to reduce her and turned it into a mirror, one that reflected back on every wall of power, every platform of privilege, every man who ever mistook mockery for might. She turned again to the dais. Language matters, she said, especially when it's used as a weapon wrapped in humor, sealed with applause, and recycled against the same type of people, again and again. She wasn't asking for sympathy. She never had. She wasn't standing for herself anymore. She was dragging into daylight every dark corner where belittlement had festered, unchecked, where insult had replaced argument, and where laughter was used to erase rather than engage. And for the first time, millions of Americans were seeing the pattern. They were seeing the machine. But Jasmine hadn't yet told them why Trump used that insult that day. She hadn't yet revealed what he was trying to hide when he said it. She hadn't even opened the final file. The chamber didn't breathe. Not because it wasn't allowed to, because it had forgotten how. After the reel of recorded contempt, after the calm dissection of 7 years of rhetoric, there were no cries of fake news, no strategic smirks, no last-minute bluster. Trump sat still, not out of respect, but because his script had failed him. The part where Jasmine would get angry, stumble, scream, it never came, because she had burned the script and rewritten it with facts. I don't need to prove my IQ, Jasmine said, leaning forward slightly. He needed to destroy it because it's the one thing he couldn't buy. The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was alive. It had teeth. Trump shifted in his seat for the first time in minutes, but there was nowhere left to move, no podium to hide behind, no crowd to flatter him. He had spent decades building his persona on volume, but Jasmine had dismantled it with silence. She continued, voice still soft, but now heavy with history. He called me low IQ. she said. Like he called Maxine, like he called Ilhan, like he called AOC. But the truth is, he doesn't mean unintelligent. He means uncontrollable. She let that word hang like a verdict. Then she drove it home. He means not his, not afraid, not silent. Somewhere in the third row, a CNN producer mouthed, "Oh my God." The MSNBC banner updated again. Crockett. He feared what he couldn't known. Phones buzzed in pockets from Florida to Flint. Text messages flooded timelines. Hashtag she brought us seats. Hashtag the pattern is the point. And then Jasmine dropped the final line, not loud, but earth-shattering. He inherited money, she said. I inherited a fight. He bought his name. I earned mine. No one clapped. Because no one could not yet. What she had built wasn't applause-worthy. It was historic, and she hadn't even opened the last folder. Not yet. And when he realized he couldn't erase my name with a slur, he tried to reduce it with a lie. Jasmine Crockett's words didn't echo, they landed, heavy, final, like a verdict delivered from something older than law. Her voice didn't need to rise, because truth has a volume all its own. Across from her, Trump's face, once red with defiance, puffed with bravado, had turned pale, drained of the swagger he wore like armor. His eyes were no longer dancing across the room for cameras. They were still fixed. Not in guilt, not even in anger, but in something rarer. Fear. Not fear of being wrong, but fear of being unmasked. Not by a shouting match, but by a woman who didn't need to scream to be heard. No one moved. Not Jim Jordan, not Marjorie Taylor Greene, not even the chairman, because this wasn't just another hearing. This was a reckoning. Jasmine inhaled, slow and deep, then exhaled with purpose. She turned to face the camera, not like a politician, making a point, but like a witness staring directly into history. Call me what you want, she said, voice clear, unshaken. But the truth doesn't need your permission to exist. And neither do I. Then she stepped back, no dramatics, no defiance, just stillness. But her presence lingered, hung in the air like smoke after a lightning strike, unshakable, elemental. The chamber didn't stir, the country didn't breathe. Because deep down, everyone watching inside the room, in living rooms, in dormitories, in nursing homes, knew the insult was never really about her IQ. It was about his reflection. And then, the silence broke, not with outrage, not with objection, but with something rarer than truth in politics. Reverence. One clap, then another. Then a slow rising wave of applause, like a storm finally allowed to roll. The gallery stood. Veterans, teachers, a retired federal judge, a union organizer in tears, for the first time anyone could remember. The marble chamber, once echoing with partisan bluster, now reverberated with something new. Something close to sacred. Truth had found oxygen. And still, Jasmine Crockett didn't bow, she didn't smile or flinch. She stood like stone cut from conviction and let the moment pass through her. Not for ego but for record. Marjorie Taylor Greene sat frozen, eyes darting, fists clenched, unsure whether to scream or disappear. Jim Jordan buried his face in a pile of loose papers. He wasn't reading. Trump didn't move at all. From the second row, the president of the NAACP rose, not as a politician, not as an activist, but as a witness to history. Madam Chair, he said, his voice reverent, trembling. That woman, he pointed, gently, as if lifting a flag, that woman is the voice of a time history tried to silence. She is not a footnote, she is the moment. The applause swelled again. Thunder now. In the press row, reporters stopped typing and just watched. On MSNBC, Rachel Maddow whispered under her breath, still on mic, I've covered a lot of hearings, but I've never seen one rewrite the mood of a country in real time. Across social media, Jasmine's words were already being immortalized, looped, quoted, remixed into TikToks, stitched into threads, painted across digital murals. But inside that room, none of it mattered to her, because Jasmine Crockett hadn't come for applause. She hadn't come for viral clips or headlines. She had come for something heavier, something eternal. She had come for the record. She leaned toward her microphone again, not to bask, but to build. Thank you, she said, eyes steady. But I'm not finished. The applause didn't stop, it ceased, as if cued by an invisible orchestra. Silence fell again, but this time, it was waiting. This isn't about a single insult, she continued. This is about a pattern, and patterns have consequences. She reached toward the folder on the desk, the one that had remained unopened the entire hearing. It sat there not like evidence, but like a sealed verdict, untouched, ominous. Her fingers hovered, paused, and then she said it. The line, the one that would live longer than any headline. I didn't come here to defeat a man, she said. I came so that history would remember someone stood and never bowed again. She wasn't closing a case. She was opening a legacy. Then, with the composure of a woman who had faced fire and walked through it intact, she tapped her mic once gently. The room went still, hanging again. You told me to sit down, genius. Not bitter, not sarcastic, surgical, precise, etched. The phrase which once floated as a cheap insult at a press conference now returned as something else. A tombstone, a mirror, a revolution. She reached to her right and lifted a small placard, no larger than a legal pad. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't dramatic. But the words etched on it might as well have been carved into marble. Article 1, Section 6, United States Constitution. For any speech or debate in either house, they shall not be questioned in any other place. The room didn't gasp, it understood. She held it up to the camera first, then slowly turned it toward the Republican. Panel, this, she said, tapping the print once, is the law of the land. This is what I carry into every hearing, every insult, every whisper that tells me I don't belong. She turned to Trump now. For the first time in minutes, their eyes met. I didn't sit down, she said, because I wasn't standing for myself. I stood for every woman ever told she was too loud, too angry, too black, too much. I stood for every daughter who watched her mother bite her tongue in rooms that weren't made for her voice. I stood for truth. The silence that followed was thick, charged, electrified, not dead, but alive. Like the air right before a storm tears open the sky, and outside that chamber, TikToks exploded, hashtags trended. A CNN anchor caught on a hot mic whispered, "Holy *T. Inside, Trump sat motionless, arms crossed, eyes hollow, no jokes, no insults. Because for the first time in a long time, he wasn't the headline, he was the punchline. And the joke had turned into a mirror. Jasmine lowered the placard. Like a flag lowered at dusk, graceful, measured like a warrior ending a war. She looked across the room one last time, not to challenge, not to gloat, to make sure they were watching as the truth refused to sit down, and then, with her final breath burning in Hull, she closed her notebook and said the line that would be carved into more than headlines. I yield my time, but I will never yield my worth. Number one responded, because what could they say? Donald J. Trump rose from his chair, like the floor had betrayed him. He didn't look at her, he didn't wave to the cameras, he simply walked out beneath the glow of the same spotlights that had once bathed him in worship, and now only showed what remained, just a man, leaving a room where truth stayed behind. It didn't echo like a headline. It rippled like a prophecy. The hearing was over, but its aftershock had just begun. For once, marble didn't echo with hollow declarations or partisan performances. For the first time in years, it didn't follow his rhythm. It broke free. The first crack in the silence came from CNN, not with a scream, but with awe. A legacy shaken, the Chiron read. Congressional showdown sends shockwaves through the nation. Then came the looped-footed Jasmine Crockett, standing calm as iron, her voice unwavering. The Constitution held not like a document, but like a mirror aimed directly at power. She didn't shout, whispered one anchor, visibly stunned. She didn't need to. By the time Twitter caught its breath, the moment had already metastasized into something bigger than politics. It was becoming a movement. In less than 2 hours. Hashtag #SitDownGenius had passed 4 million mentions. By the 4th hour, it had eclipsed 12 million. Teenagers remixed it into videos with beats. Veterans quoted it with a single word, thanks. Even late-night hosts paused to their punchlines. The moment was too real for jokes. One meme showed Jasmine standing still, placard raised, no words, just the caption. She broke him without touching him. But outside the meme cycles, beyond the sound bites and virality, something deeper was shifting. At Jasmine Crockett's office, the phone lines jammed before noon. Her staff, young, seasoned, wide-eyed, sat stunned as they read emails aloud that felt more like confessions. One came from an 86-year-old retired teacher in Birmingham. I was told to sit down in 1962. Watching you stand made me feel like I finally stood too. Another, a postcard from a nurse in Detroit. You didn't just hold him accountable. You made my daughter believe she could be heard. And on the walls of cities, Jasmine's silhouette began to appear. Not projected by media, but painted by hands-on. A church in Atlanta, a school fence in Oakland, a courthouse wall in Philadelphia. Above each mural, 5 words etched like scripture. I will never yield my worth. In Washington, the energy shifted. Reporters no longer glanced past black women lawmakers. They leaned in, they followed, they listened. The attention Jasmine now commanded wasn't the product of scandal or spectacle. It wasn't loud. It was undeniable. While one side scrambled to draft press statements, hold emergency meetings, and spin the narrative, Jasmine sat alone in her modest office away from the marble, the lights, the echo chamber. She wasn't tweeting. She was reading a handwritten letter in blue ink. From a 14-year-old girl in rural Kansas. My mom says smart girls have to be quiet. You proved her wrong. Jasmine folded the paper gently, as if it were sacred, and slipped it into her briefcase, not for nostalgia, but for the days ahead. Then she took a breath, not of relief, but of readiness. Because what had happened in that chamber wasn't an ending, it was the beginning of a storm. Hours later, far from Capitol Hill, her car pulled into a simple parking lot in South Dallas. No podiums, no marble walls, just concrete, Texas heat, and the soft hum of a neighborhood office that smelled of copier, toner, and quiet resilience. She stepped out, still wearing the suit from the hearing. But now, it didn't look like a uniform. It looked like armor that had survived a war. The door hadn't even fully shut behind her when she heard the rushing of small footsteps. A little black girl no older than 7 bolted through the lobby, with the kind of joy that can't be scripted. She flung her arms around Jasmine's waist. "I want to speak like you one day," the girl said. Not like a compliment. Like a vow. Jasmine knelt, brushing a soft curl from the girl's forehead. "You already do," she whispered. "You just don't know it yet." And the child nodded. Not politely, but like she believed it with her whole heart. Outside, a crowd had quietly gathered. Not press, not pundits, people, teachers, janitors, grandmothers, teens with headphones, men who had voted and doubted, women who had waited and wondered, people who had once been told to hush. Now they stooped together, not carrying flags, but something heavier, presence. Silent, but thunderous. Back inside. Jasmine opened a cabinet and placed the forged transcript, the one that started it all, into a locked drawer. She didn't need it anymore. The truth wasn't on paper. It was in motion, moving through millions of awakened minds, hearts, memories. She stood by her window as the Texas sun dipped low, casting gold through glass, and she thought of all the years they had tried to laugh her off, talk over her, flatten her into a stereotype. They mocked her voice because it carried something they didn't know how to quantify, clarity, and when that failed, they tried to call her mind into question, hoping that self-doubt would do what opposition couldn't, but it didn't, because that mind wasn't just Jasmine's. It was the mind of every girl, told she wasn't enough, every student who had to be twice as good for half the credit. Every mother who held her tongue in boardrooms, courtrooms, classrooms, so her daughters could eventually speak freely. They tried to silence one voice. Instead, they woke up 1,000 more. When Jasmine stood tall in that chamber and chose stillness over spectacle, she didn't just confront a man, she confronted an era. She proved that intelligence doesn't need to shout, it doesn't need applause, it only needs courage. And when that little girl threw her arms around her, when she said, "I want to speak like you," the nation saw something that no vote, no headline, no law could fabricate, a reflection of itself, a promise renewed. So now we ask you, the viewer, have you ever stayed silent, not out of fear, but because you are carrying a truth powerful enough to change everything? Then speak. If this story struck something in you, don't scroll past. Like, share, subscribe to Mr. Truth Stories, where voices like Jasmine Crockett's remind us every day. Truth doesn't shout, it stands. Tap the bell, because the next chapter, it might not just expose a lie, it might awaken something inside you. This story is a dramatization, inspired by real voices, real pain, real power. All characters and dialogue are fictionalized, for commentary, not defamation. It is not intended to wound, but to wake. Thanks for watching. Truth isn't over, it's just waiting for someone brave enough to carry it forward.